Have you ever spent years wondering why someone you loved just disappeared? Now, imagine this. You're a single mother, scraping by at a roadside diner, when a man from your past, once your everything, walks through the door. Only now, he's a millionaire, and he doesn't even recognize you, or the son he unknowingly left behind. What would you do? Tell him the truth, right there in front of your child, or protect the quiet, fragile life you've spent? Over a decade building, Grace Whitmore faced that impossible moment. Daniel Prescott, the man she once trusted with her heart, now stands just feet away, unaware of the 13 years of silence, struggle, and strength she's lived without him. And in the middle of it all, Eli, their brilliant, intuitive son, caught between the father he never knew and the mother who never gave up. This isn't just a story about lost love. It's about choices, regret, redemption, and the quiet courage it takes to open a door that's been shut for too long. If you were her, what would you choose? Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories to follow this deeply moving journey. Now, let's begin. The morning rush at Hollow Creek Diner had always been a comforting kind of chaos. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clatter of porcelain mugs, the murmur of conversation from regulars tucked into corner booths. It was the rhythm of familiarity, the sound of survival. For Grace Whitmore, it was also the sound of endurance. She moved like someone who had done this 1,000 times because her apron, faded from years of washes, was tied neatly at the back. Her graying blonde hair was pulled into a no-nonsense bun. Her hands, though graceful, bore the quiet calluses of someone who had chosen work over rest far too often. It was a Tuesday, which meant the mayor's secretary would order the usual avocado toast without the toast, and old Jim at booth 5 would leave a cryptic joke written on the back of the check. It was a town of patterns, safe, predictable, until her pen hovered mid-air. She stared at the name printed on the order slip. It wasn't long, just 2 words, but they cut through her like a shard of glass. Daniel Prescott. She blinked, her throat tightening as a cold current slid through her chest. It couldn't be. Not here. Not after 13 years. The ticket had come from table 9, the one by the window that overlooked the quiet street where dog walkers and joggers passed like clockwork. It was the best seat in the diner, the one people asked for on rainy days. She forced herself to look over. He was there, alone. Dressed in a tailored navy coat over a crisp white shirt. His hair was darker now, styled more neatly, and he wore the years well more polished, more composed, but it was him. There was no mistaking the jawline, or the way he tilted his head slightly when reading the menu. She had once rested her head on that shoulder beneath the summer stars. Her heart stammered inside her chest, both stunned and strangely silent. Daniel Prescott, the boy who'd promised to call, to come back, to never forget her. And then vanished. The man who had left her pregnant at 19 without a single goodbye. Grace stood behind the counter, motionless, order slip in one hand and pen in the other, as the world around her seemed to fade into a dull hush. The clinking dishes, the bell over the door, it all faded behind the roar of memory. Behind her, Darlene, the other waitress on shift, called out, "Grace, you okay? You look like you saw a ghost." She didn't answer. She couldn't. In a flash, her eyes darted back to the slip again, almost willing the name to be wrong. A typo, a joke, a coincidence. But no. There it was, in clean black ink from the new tablet system, Daniel Prescott, the name she hadn't said aloud in over a decade. Her hands began to tremble, just slightly. She steadied herself against the counter and took a deep breath. "You want me to take it?" Darlene offered gently, sensing something was off. Grace shook her head, a slow, deliberate movement. "No," she said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "I've got it." Because she did. She always did. Tray in hand. She walked across the diner floor. Each step felt like crossing a bridge suspended over her past. The memories came rushing in, laughing in a pickup truck, falling asleep to the sound of his voice, the letter she wrote that never got a reply, the knock on the mansion door that no one opened. When she reached the table, Daniel didn't look up right away. He was scrolling through his phone, completely unaware that the woman standing before him once held his child inside her. "Good morning," she said, the words escaping her lips with practiced ease, though her voice wavered beneath them. He glanced up. His eyes met hers. For a moment, just a moment, there was a flicker, a pause in the air, recognition trying to break through the fog of time. But it was gone in an instant. "Just coffee, please," he said. "Black." She nodded. Of course. As she turned away, 1,000 things fought to rise inside her. Names, questions, accusations. But instead, she just walked back to the counter, her hands now steady, her heart not so much. What do you do when the past walks in and sits at table 9 like nothing ever happened? You pour the coffee, you smile, and you try not to fall apart. But Grace Whitmore knew one thing for certain. This was not going to be just another Tuesday. Grace stood at the sink in the back of Hollow Creek Diner, rinsing out a coffee pot that had long since emptied. Her reflection shimmered on the aluminum wall paneling tired eyes, crow's feet a little deeper than the year before, and a quiet kind of grace that had grown not from ease, but endurance. She'd once been told she had an old soul, maybe because life had aged her faster than birthdays could. Behind her, the door swung open. "Grace, you sure you're okay?" Darlene leaned in, voice low and lined with concern. "You've been off since that guy came in." Grace smiled, barely. "I'm fine. Just tired. Eli stayed up late working on some science thing." Darlene didn't press. Grace was the type who carried things in silence, always had been. But something about today felt different. She wasn't just tired. She was haunted. Grace dried her hands, hung the towel, and stepped back onto the diner floor. The late morning lull had settled in, and Daniel Prescott was gone. His cup sat empty, the check paid, a business card left behind with a few words scribbled on the back. "Good to be home. D.P." Grace stared at the card. The name made her stomach twist, not with bitterness. No, that had faded over the years like an old bruise. It was something more complicated now, a tangled ache that held too many colors to name. That evening, Grace unlocked the front door of her modest rental at the edge of town. The house was small, but warm, filled with thrift store bookshelves and the scent of rosemary from the little potted herb garden Eli kept by the window. Mom Eli's voice came from the kitchen. "In here," she called, setting her purse down on the narrow hall table. Eli padded into the room, his socks mismatched, a pencil tucked behind one ear. He was 13 now, too tall, too fast, all elbows and questions and bright, brilliant eyes. He handed her a folded piece of paper, his grin proud. "Mr. Kerrigan said I could probably place in the state finals with this project." She opened it, a hand-drawn schematic of a small wind turbine, complete with energy output estimates and notes written in tiny, precise handwriting. Her heart swelled. "That's incredible, honey. I'm proud of you." Eli beamed, brushing it off the way he always did. "It's just physics. The real trick is the gearing system." He grabbed a yogurt from the fridge and flopped onto the couch. "Hey, Mom, did you ever think about going to college, like, before me?" Grace paused, her fingers curling slightly around the handle of the kettle. "I did," she said softly. "I had plans once, but you didn't go." He looked up. "Because of me." She sat beside him, cupping his face gently with her hand. "Because of life. Because things happen. But never, not for a second, did I regret having you." He nodded, but the question lingered behind his eyes. Grace wanted to tell him everything. About Daniel, about promises made on summer nights, about the letter she sent that came back unopened, about standing outside a grand estate with no one willing to let her in. But how do you explain to your child that love isn't always strong enough to survive silence, that sometimes the people we trust disappear, and the reasons are buried so deep they rot into myth? "You ever wonder about my dad?" Eli asked suddenly, catching her off guard. "All the time," she answered, surprising even herself. Eli's expression softened. Yeah, me too. They didn't say much after that. Grace made soup. Eli tinkered with wires and magnets, and the night passed like so many before it quiet, stretched across the gaps between them that neither of them yet knew how to bridge. But one thought kept tapping at the edge of her mind as she lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling. Daniel was back, and with him. 13 years of silence. 13 years of mornings spent pretending she was fine. 13 years of telling herself she'd stopped wondering what it would feel like to look him in the eye again. And now, she knew. It felt like nothing and everything all at once. It was Thursday morning when Grace saw him again. The sunlight slanted low across the floor of Hollow Creek Diner, illuminating the dew still clinging to the glass. The usual faces trickled in retired couples who ordered one breakfast to share, young professionals hunched over laptops, a few high school kids skipping first period, and then he walked in, Daniel Prescott. Again. Grace hadn't told Darlene about the business card. She hadn't mentioned the note or how her hands trembled when she tucked it into the back of her recipe book like something sacred and dangerous. She hadn't even told Eli, especially not Eli. She had hoped quietly, desperately, that it was a one-time visit, a fluke, a coincidence, maybe a wrong turn from some investor conference in Boston. But there he was, same coat, same stride, same subtle command of the room that he didn't even seem aware of. He chose the same table, the one by the window. Grace busied herself behind the counter. She could feel his presence like static in the air, thick, electric, unavoidable. Darlene glanced at her, then toward the table, then back. "Your friend's back," she said with a half smile. "He's not my friend." Grace took a slow breath and forced herself toward his table, notepad in hand. Her steps were steady this time, but her mind still a storm. "Good morning," she said evenly. He looked up, and this time, his eyes lingered a moment longer. "You again," he said, smiling. "Either I have very good taste, or this diner is the only decent place in town. We make a mean turkey hash," she said. "I'll take your word for it. And coffee. Same as last time." She nodded, about to turn away when he paused. "I'm sorry," he said. "Do I know you?" Grace froze. It was a simple question, innocent, expected, even, but for her, it was a splinter under the skin. "No," she said. "I just work here." Daniel smiled politely and went back to his phone, but his gaze followed her as she walked away. Behind the counter, Grace poured the coffee with steady hands. Her heart, however, was anything but. He didn't recognize her. After all this time, all those nights, everything they had shared, he didn't see her. But why would he? Back then. She was a girl with dreams and beach hair, barefoot in the back of his father's truck. Now, she was a woman who smelled of bacon grease and wore shoes with orthopedic insoles. Time doesn't just change people. It recasts them. That afternoon, Grace picked Eli up from the school robotics club. He climbed into the car, backpack unzipped, a trail of paper and wires tumbling out behind him. "Mom," he said, before even closing the door, "can I enter the state fair this year, the one in Concord? They've got a junior engineer category. Let me guess, wind turbine." He grinned. "Nope. Solar desalination system, with an automated pivot." She laughed. "Fancy." He buckled in, then glanced at her. "You okay?" Grace hesitated. Eli had always been good at reading her, even when he didn't have the full picture. She reached over and ruffled his hair. Just a long day. As they drove home, a question pressed at the back of her mind. One she'd pushed down for years, but now couldn't silence. What if he really didn't know? What if Daniel hadn't left by choice? What if someone had made sure he never knew? It was foolish. Maybe. But in the brief flicker of confusion on his face at the diner, Grace had seen something she hadn't expected: sincerity. That night, after Eli went to bed, Grace sat at the kitchen table, her cup of tea gone cold. She opened a wooden box she hadn't touched in years. Inside were old photos, a silver locket, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The last letter was dated September 2009. It was the one she had mailed to the Prescott estate. the one that came back returned to sender. She traced the ink on the envelope with her fingertip, not out of nostalgia, not anymore, out of need. Something wasn't right. And maybe, after all this time, it was finally time to find out why. The autumn air carried that crisp, brittle edge Grace had always associated with endings. Leaves crunched under her worn boots as she walked up the quiet, curving road that led to Prescott Hill, a name locals still used with a mix of reverence and resentment. The estate wasn't visible from the road. That was intentional. The Prescotts had always lived behind long drives and locked gates, behind velvet drapes and social distance that couldn't be measured in miles alone. Grace hadn't been up this way since she was 19, pregnant, alone, naively hopeful, and desperate. Back then, she'd stood at the gate clutching a letter and a heart full of trembling belief. She remembered pressing the intercom button over and over, speaking into it like a fool. "Please, I just need to talk to Daniel." No one came, except for a uniformed guard who told her, "Miss, you need to leave." Now, she stood again 13 years later at the same spot. No intercom this time, just memories and questions, and a quiet resolve that had taken over where hope once lived. She didn't expect anyone to answer. This was a ritual more than anything, a facing of ghosts. But as she turned to leave, the gate buzzed softly. Then it opened. Grace froze. A woman's voice called from the end of the long driveway. "Can I help you?" It wasn't just any woman. Mrs. Eleanor Prescott. She hadn't changed much, impeccably dressed, silver hair swept into a French twist, posture ramrod straight. If Daniel carried quiet elegance in his manner, it was clear where he'd learned it. Grace felt her spine go stiff. "Mrs. Prescott," she said, "I'm Grace Whitmore." A flicker of something recognition, perhaps passed through the older woman's face. Then it vanished, like a shutter closing. "Yes," she said coolly, "I remember." That surprised Grace. "I didn't expect you would. Let's not pretend this is a social call," Eleanor said. Not unkind, but not warm either. "I assume this has something to do with your visit to the estate all those years ago." Grace nodded. "I came to see Daniel. I was carrying his child. I recall. You turned me away." Eleanor said nothing. "I sent letters, left voicemails. I never heard back." Eleanor tilted her head. "And what is it you want now?" Grace hesitated, hearing the old shame rise in her chest like an old bruise pressing against the surface. "I don't want anything," she said, voice steady. "I just want the truth." Eleanor didn't flinch. The truth is a complicated thing. Miss Whitmore, sometimes it's better left untouched, especially when it concerns legacies built over generations. Grace stepped forward. "He's back in town. He came into the diner. He looked me in the eye and didn't recognize me. And when I looked at him, I saw a man who honestly didn't know." Eleanor's silence deepened. "You knew he didn't know," Grace whispered, the realization sinking in like a stone in water. "You kept him in the dark." There was a pause, a long one. And then Eleanor said something Grace never expected. "I did what I thought was best. For my son. For our family." Grace swallowed hard. He had a right to know. About me. About his son. Eleanor's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. And would knowing have changed anything? Would it have made him less reckless at 20? Less bound to a future not of his choosing? You think love would have rewritten inheritance, responsibility, the expectations that come with our name? Grace stared at her. Maybe it wouldn't have changed the world, but it might have changed ours. A quiet moment passed between them, hanging in the sharp autumn air like breath. "I won't stop him from learning the truth now," Eleanor said at last, her voice a thread between command and concession. "But I won't help you expose it either. If he comes to you, it must be by his choice." With that, she turned and walked back down the gravel drive, disappearing behind wrought iron gates and years of silence. That night, Grace sat on the floor of her bedroom, the box of letters spread out around her like a paper snowfall, each one a piece of a story no one had listened to, except her son. She could hear him in the next room, humming softly as he worked on another invention, unaware that just a few miles away, the man who had fathered him was walking freely through the town, oblivious to the life he'd helped create. She opened the last letter again. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means you want to know about me, about the baby, about what happened after that summer. Please, don't let someone else's silence define who we were. She folded the letter, placed it in a new envelope, and stared at Daniel's business card still tucked into the recipe book. Maybe it was time to return it, but not by mail this time. No more silence. The wind outside the Whitmore house rustled through the brittle branches like it had something to say, something just beyond the edge of understanding. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor of his bedroom, the soft glow of his desk lamp casting shadows across the walls. His fingers moved with practiced ease through a tangle of wires and copper coils, assembling the internal circuit for his desalination project. But his mind wasn't on science tonight. It was on the photograph he'd found tucked inside an old copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a book his mother claimed she hadn't touched in years. The photo was simple, grainy, faded like memory, a younger version of his mom, maybe 19, in cut-off jeans and a sun-faded tank top, leaning against a rust-red pickup truck. She was laughing, the way people do when they still believe love is enough. Next to her stood a boy, broad shoulders, a lopsided grin, dark hair caught in the wind. One arm slung around her waist like it had always belonged there. Eli stared at the boy. He tilted the photo, then tilted his head, then brought it closer to the light. It wasn't just resemblance. It wasn't maybe. It was eerie. Same eyes, same jawline, same chin with the tiny cleft he hated, but his mom said made him look distinguished. He didn't know who the boy was. But suddenly, he had a feeling he knew who his father might be. Later that night, Grace found Eli uncharacteristically quiet over dinner. "You're not hungry, I'm thinking," he said, pushing peas around with his fork. "That sounds dangerous." He smiled faintly. "Mom, can I ask you something?" She set down her glass. Her heart always braced a little when he used that tone. Careful, serious, like he was trying not to break something fragile. "Of course. Do I look like him?" She blinked. "Like who?" "My dad." Grace's throat closed up before she could answer. "Because I found this," he said, pulling the photo from his hoodie pocket and sliding it across the table. His eyes didn't leave her face. She stared at it, at a moment captured from a life that felt like it had belonged to someone else. She traced her own smile in the photo. It felt distant, like looking at a sister you never really knew. "Where did you—" "In the bookshelf," he said. "It fell out of one of your old books." She nodded slowly. That was the summer before college, before everything changed. He leaned in slightly. "Is that him?" She didn't answer with words. Her silence was louder. Eli exhaled. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Grace looked down, her hands clasped in her lap. "Because I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to give you half a story. I thought I was protecting you." Eli swallowed hard. "Did he leave because of me?" Her head snapped up. "No, never think that." Then why her voice cracked when she answered. "Because some people make decisions for others. Because sometimes silence is forced on us, and sometimes it's easier to believe someone didn't want us than to believe they never had the chance to." They sat in quiet for a long moment, the air between them thick with words neither of them could fully form. Then Eli spoke, his voice quieter now. "What's his name?" Grace hesitated. Finally, she said it. "Daniel. Daniel Prescott." Eli's brow furrowed. Like the Prescott tech guy, the one on the news last week, Grace's face went pale. "You've seen him." "Not in person. Just his company donated to the school. There was a ceremony. He gave the speech. That's why I recognized him in the picture." She gripped the edge of the table, breath catching in her throat. So the two of them were moving on parallel tracks now, circling closer. "You have his eyes," she whispered. Eli looked down at his hands. "What happens now?" he asked. Grace didn't know how to answer, but Eli did. "I want to meet him." Her chest tightened. "Eli, I'm not mad," he said. "I'm not even sad. I just want to know who he is. I want to look at him and see if he looks back." There was no anger in his voice, just longing. Grace reached across the table and took his hand. "Then we'll figure this out. Together." But as she said it, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a truth she wasn't ready to face. What if Daniel wasn't ready? What if learning the truth shattered everything? The letter arrived on a Wednesday. It was tucked inside a manila envelope, marked with the New Hampshire State Youth Innovation Fair logo, and sealed with a neatly folded sheet of official stationery. Eli tore it open in the living room while Grace was folding laundry. He read the first line in silence, then turned to her, eyes wide. "I got in," he said, voice steady but glowing with disbelief. "They picked me." Grace dropped the towel she was folding. The Concord Fair. He nodded, still holding the letter like it might vanish if he blinked. "They accepted my solar desalination project. There's going to be a panel of judges from local tech companies, some national sponsors too." "That's amazing," she said, walking over to wrap him in a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you." Eli hugged her back, but she could feel the tension under the excitement. "There's more," he said, gently pulling away. "The keynote speaker this year." He handed her the second page of the letter. Grace read the bolded name aloud. Daniel Prescott. The world narrowed around her. Of course, it made perfect sense. The Prescott Foundation had been quietly sponsoring educational outreach programs across New England for years. It was exactly the kind of high-profile appearance Daniel would make well-intentioned, publicized, and polished to perfection. She stared at the paper, her mind whirling through a storm of scenarios. This was more than coincidence. This was the collision course she'd feared, and perhaps the one fate had planned all along. Mom Eli asked, watching her reaction carefully. "Is this okay?" She looked at him, this boy she'd raised alone, with all his empathy and wonder and intelligence, and she knew the real question he was asking. "Will you let me meet him?" Grace nodded slowly, her voice soft. "Yes, you deserve that. The following Saturday." Grace stood at the edge of the Concord Civic Auditorium, watching students unload poster boards and equipment from their parents' trunks. She clutched a travel mug in one hand, not for the coffee, but for the warmth. Her nerves were frayed thin, her composure maintained only by instinct. Eli's project was already set up. Row 5, table 14, a polished display with graphs and a small model glistening under fluorescent light. He stood beside it, dressed in a button-down shirt, his hair combed neatly to the side. He looked older somehow, more certain. As the fair commenced, crowds moved in slow waves around the room, teachers, engineers, families, press. Then the announcer's voice rang through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote guest founder of Prescott Technologies and a longtime advocate for youth STEM initiatives, Mr. Daniel Prescott." The applause rose. Grace's heart dropped. She turned slowly. Daniel walked out onto the stage at the far end of the hall. Grace hadn't seen him like this before, centered, confident, in his element. Dressed in tailored charcoal gray, he looked every bit the visionary he had become. Eli watched from a distance, his face unreadable. Daniel stepped to the microphone. "Thank you for having me," he began, his voice calm, warm. "Innovation doesn't begin in boardrooms or billion-dollar labs. It begins right here, in high school basements, on kitchen tables, in the minds of students who see problems not as obstacles but as opportunities." Grace felt a tremor in her chest, because she remembered that voice. The boy who once whispered dreams across a lakeside dock now stood in front of hundreds, shaping futures. And yet, he didn't know one of his own was standing just feet away. After the speech, Daniel stepped off stage and began touring the exhibits. Cameras followed him, but he moved with ease, stopping to ask thoughtful questions, smiling in that same tilted way Eli had when he was proud of something. Eli watched him from a distance, then looked at his mother. She gave him a small, silent nod. He took a breath and turned toward Daniel's path. Daniel was standing beside a booth about AI and agriculture when he heard a quiet voice, "Mr. Prescott." He turned. Eli stood in front of him, posture steady but heart visibly racing. He extended a hand. I'm Eli Whitmore. I'm a finalist this year. I wanted to thank you for supporting the fair. Daniel smiled and shook his hand. Nice to meet you, Eli. What's your project, solar desalination? Over there, table 14. Smart choice. That's a growing problem we'll need young minds to solve. Eli hesitated, then added, My mom's the reason I got into this stuff. She's the smartest person I know. Daniel nodded. Sounds like you've got a great support system. Something flickered in his expression, an echo of something almost familiar. Eli took a small step back. You probably don't remember her. Her name's Grace. Grace Whitmore. Daniel blinked. The name settled on him slowly, like a snowflake melting on skin. Then the world shifted. Daniel Prescott stood frozen in the wide, crowded aisle of the Concord Civic Auditorium, surrounded by bright displays and low conversation, but he heard none of it. The name Grace Whitmore echoed in his ears like a bell struck deep within a cave, reverberating through time and memory. It couldn't be. He turned toward Eli, who stood watching him not with accusation, but with expectation. Daniel stared at the boy more closely now, truly seeing him, the shape of his face, the flecks of green in his hazel eyes, the cleft in his chin. He felt something twist in his chest, a recognition too deep to be coincidence. I'm sorry, Daniel said slowly. What did you say your name was? Eli, the boy repeated. Eli Whitmore. The room seemed to tilt. Daniel reached out to the side of the table, steadying himself with one hand. Eli's expression flickered with concern. Are you okay? I just haven't heard that name in a very long time. Eli looked down. My mom said it might be a surprise. I think she wanted me to wait, but I guess I didn't want to. Daniel swallowed hard. The past 13 years unfurled like a map in his mind, flashes of laughter, her voice, that last summer before everything fell silent, how he had written her, called her, searched for her, and how, slowly, shamefully, he gave up, believing she had chosen a different path, one without him. She never told me why. He murmured aloud. She just disappeared. Eli tilted his head. That's not what she remembers. Daniel blinked. She said she came to your house, that she sent letters, that someone turned her away. Daniel's jaw clenched. A quiet fury rose not at Grace, but at the silence that had followed. He knew who had the keys to that silence. My mother, he said. Eli looked confused. Your mother. Daniel turned slightly away, rubbing the back of his neck. The noise of the auditorium returned in waves. A camera flashed nearby. He needed to get out of there, away from the lights, the audience, the polished illusion. Would you excuse me a moment? He said. Eli nodded, his face unreadable. Daniel stepped outside into the cold November air, his breath puffing in quick, sharp clouds. He pulled out his phone. For the first time in years, his hands trembled as he typed Grace Whitmore, Hollow Creek Diner. The search loaded in seconds. There she was, grainy in a staff photo, holding a tray of pie slices and smiling at a customer like nothing in the world had ever broken her. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She hadn't disappeared. She had been here, the whole time. Meanwhile, inside the auditorium, Eli stood beside his project, quiet now. He looked down at the ribbon pinned to the corner of his display, a semi-finalist tag, something he would have been proud of yesterday. But today wasn't about ribbons. Today was about truth. He turned slowly as a familiar presence approached. Hey, said Grace, her eyes sweeping the crowd before finding her son. How did it go? Eli didn't say anything for a long time. Then he didn't know. Mom. Grace's shoulders slumped. What do you mean, he didn't know about me? About you? About anything? A heavy silence fell between them, not angry, not wounded, just sad. She reached out and pulled him into a hug. And in that moment, the question neither of them had dared to ask finally settled in both of their hearts. What happens when the past remembers you and it comes walking straight toward your door? The road to Prescott Hill had not changed. The same winding curves lined with ancient trees, the same cold, ornamental gates, and the same quiet dread settling in Daniel's chest as his car rolled to a stop outside the estate. He hadn't been here in nearly 6 months, not since the Prescott Foundation's annual gala. He usually avoided this place unless obligation or optics demanded it. But today wasn't about obligation. Today was about the truth. He stepped out of the car and stared at the estate beyond the gates, stately and distant, like a photograph of a life he no longer claimed. He pressed the intercom. The voice on the other end was familiar. "Yes, it's me," he said. "Open the gate." A pause, then the slow, mechanical hum of steel parting. Eleanor Prescott stood in the foyer when he entered, as if she had been waiting. As always, she looked regal, like she'd stepped out of a portrait. She wore slate gray, a strand of pearls, and an expression carved in control. "Daniel," she said. "Mother. You didn't say you were coming. I didn't think I needed to." He walked past her, coat still on, straight toward the drawing room. She followed, footsteps composed, though the air between them had already grown sharp. "I saw someone today," he said, turning only slightly. "A boy. His name is Eli." She didn't flinch, but her silence filled the room like thunder before the strike. "His last name is Whitmore." Still no reply. "His mother's name is Grace," he continued. "Grace Whitmore." Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice measured. "I remember her." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Do you?" "She came here once," Eleanor said, unannounced, hysterical. "She was 19. She was pregnant." "She was in love with me," he said sharply, his voice rising. "And I loved her." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what would you have done?" "Daniel abandoned your education, tossed your future to play house in a trailer park." "She wasn't asking me to give anything up," he snapped. "She was asking me to know." A silence stretched long between them. "I sent her letters," he said. "She never answered. I called. I stopped by her apartment before I left for school. No one ever told me where she went." Eleanor walked to the fireplace, her fingers trailing the marble mantel. "You were on the cusp of everything," she said. "Harvard, your company, your place in the world. That girl. That life it would have pulled you under." Daniel stared at her, disbelief widening in his eyes. "You took that choice away from me. I gave you a better one," she said, and this time her voice cracked just barely. "I did what any mother would do. I protected you." "No," he said quietly. "You protected your vision of who I should be. You made my son grow up thinking I didn't want him." Eleanor turned to him, something shifting in her face. "You have no idea the weight of legacy. Daniel, the price of reputation. One wrong headline." "Eli is not a headline," he said. "He's a person. He's my son." A long pause. "I don't want to fight," he added, more softly now. "I just want to understand. I need to know, did you ever tell father?" Her face hardened. "No." "Did anyone else know?" She shook her head. Daniel looked away, a muscle ticking in his jaw. The betrayal felt too large to fit in the room. "You can't keep shaping my life around your fear, Mother." Eleanor walked toward him slowly, then reached out a rare gesture. "You were so young," she said, "and so easily led." And now he asked, stepping back, "Now I have a son I've never held." A boy who stood in front of me and thanked me for sponsoring a science fair while I looked him in the eye and didn't even know he existed. His voice broke. "Do you understand what that feels like?" Eleanor didn't reply, because she didn't. And deep down, perhaps she never would. Daniel turned and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" she called after him. "To find my son," he said, "and the woman you never let me say goodbye to." And with that, he left, back in Hollow Creek. The diner was quiet. Grace sat at the back table, staring out the window as dusk pulled shadows across the pavement. A cup of untouched coffee cooled beside her. She didn't look up when the door opened, but she did when she heard the voice. "Hi," Daniel said. Her breath caught. He stood in the entryway, hesitant, older, but no longer distant, not polished, not guarded, just human, just him. And for the first time in 13 years, their eyes met without the noise of memory between them. The diner was nearly empty, bathed in the soft amber hue of its old pendant lights. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between them as Grace motioned for Daniel to sit. He did across from her at the booth, tucked into the corner, the one where he had unknowingly sat just days before, oblivious to the life he'd once helped create. She looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from years of carrying things alone. Still, there was a steadiness in her gaze. She wasn't here to fall apart. "Coffee?" she asked quietly. Daniel shook his head. "No, thanks." She nodded, wrapping her fingers around her own cup, as if to keep her hands from trembling. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I didn't know. Grace, I swear to you, I didn't know. I believe you," she said softly. He exhaled, as if releasing something that had clung to him too tightly. "Why didn't you come back?" she asked, not accusingly, but with years of aching curiosity. "I tried," he said. "I wrote, I called. I even stopped by your place before I left for school. Your roommate told me you'd gone home. I left messages at your mom's. I never got them," Grace whispered, "and when I went to your house, she wouldn't let me in. Said you'd already gone, that it was over." Daniel looked down, guilt flickering across his face. "She told me you never reached out, that you'd made your choice." "I did," Grace said. "I chose to raise a child." His eyes met hers. There was no judgment in them, only awe. "What was it like?" he asked. "Raising him on your own?" She let out a soft laugh, wry and weary. "Hard, beautiful. Some days I didn't know how we'd make it through. Other days, he'd say something that made me feel like I'd won the lottery. He's so smart. Daniel, so thoughtful." He nodded, his throat tightening. "I saw it. At the fair. He carries himself like someone twice his age. He carries a lot," she said. "Questions, dreams, gaps I couldn't fill." Daniel leaned forward, voice low. "I want to be there for him. I want to know him." Grace looked at him, and for the first time since he walked through the door, her eyes softened. "I don't want to keep him from you," she said. "But I need you to understand, this isn't just about biology. It's about showing up, about choosing him every single day." "I will," Daniel said, without hesitation. "I want to." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. A pause. "Why didn't you try harder to find me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel swallowed. "Because after a while, I started to believe what she said, that you'd moved on, that maybe I had imagined what we had. You didn't. I know that now." Grace looked out the window. The street was quiet. The world had gone on. People had gotten married, buried parents, changed jobs, and grown old, while they had each lived in separate chapters of the same unfinished book. She turned back to him. "He's been asking about you for years. I want to answer every question he has. He might not make it easy." "I don't deserve easy," Daniel said. "I just want honest." Grace studied him. The boy she once loved had become a man who carried his guilt like a second shadow. But there was still something in him, something real, something worth trying for. "You should come for dinner," she said suddenly. Daniel blinked. "Really?" "Yes," she said. "Nothing formal. Just a chance to see what 13 years looks like." He nodded. "I'd like that." She stood, reaching for the coffee pot. He likes to talk while he builds things. Give him space, and he'll open up. "And you?" he asked. "I don't build machines," she said with a small smile. "I build quiet lives, and I ruined that." "No," she said gently. "You were just the silence in it." Daniel looked down, humbled. As he rose to leave, he paused. "Grace, thank you for not turning him against me. I could have," she said, "but I wanted him to have the chance to form his own opinion. That's something no one gave me. Daniel nodded, then quietly stepped into the night. And Grace stood alone again, only this time, not with a broken heart, but with a door that had finally begun to open. The table had never felt small before. It was the same old wooden one Grace had picked up from a second-hand shop a decade ago. The same table where Eli had spilled juice boxes and glued model rockets and written book reports. Where Grace had paid bills by candlelight during power outages. It was worn at the edges, slightly uneven on one leg, and always a bit too close to the kitchen counter. But tonight, it felt different, because tonight, it had to fit something it never had before. A father. Daniel stood on the porch with a bottle of red wine in one hand and a paper bag of bakery bread in the other, looking like someone who wasn't sure if he was dressed too formally or not enough. He hesitated for a beat, then knocked. Grace opened the door and gave him a gentle smile. "You made it." "I did," he said. "I wasn't sure if I should wear a tie or bring a gift, so I panicked and brought both." She looked at the bag in his hand. Bread organic, locally baked, possibly the most expensive loaf I've ever purchased. She laughed softly and stepped aside. "It'll impress the right person." He walked in slowly, glancing around. The house smelled like roasted garlic and rosemary. It was warm, lived in, honest. And then he saw Eli standing by the table, nervously adjusting the silverware. "Hey," Daniel said. Eli gave a small nod. "Hi." There was a pause, both of them unsure of what the next move should be. "Smells amazing in here," Daniel said to fill the silence. "Mom's lasagna," Eli said. "It's kind of a tradition." "Well, then I'm honored." They sat down, the three of them, a triangle of history, curiosity, and tentative hope. Dinner started with small talk. Daniel asked about Eli's project. Eli answered in bursts, then retreated into awkward quiet. Grace kept the rhythm flowing, occasionally translating Daniel's corporate speak into teen language or Eli's tech terms into something softer. As the lasagna disappeared slice by slice, the conversation deepened. "Do you like your job?" Eli asked suddenly. Daniel paused mid-bite, caught off guard. "I do," he said. "It challenges me. But lately, it's felt a little hollow." Eli tilted his head. "Why?" "Because the things I used to care about the most, innovation, growth, legacy, started to feel like distractions. Like I was building a skyscraper on a missing foundation." Eli blinked, processing. "So, like building up instead of building in." Daniel smiled. "Exactly." There was a brief flicker of something between them, a shared understanding. Grace caught it and held her breath quietly. Eli pushed his plate back, thoughtful. "I don't remember ever seeing you, like in pictures or anything." Daniel's smile faded. "That's because I didn't know about you." Eli, "Not until recently." "If I had, I know," Eli said. "I believe you." Daniel looked down, overwhelmed by the kindness in that simple phrase. "I missed a lot," he said. Eli was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are you going to disappear again?" Grace closed her eyes. Daniel leaned forward. "No. I don't want to be someone who leaves." Eli looked at his mom, then back at him. "Okay, I guess we'll see." Grace stood to clear the plates, giving the two a moment of space. From the sink, she listened as Daniel asked Eli about his next project, and Eli lit up animated, alive in a way that was rare with new people. And then, without prompting, Eli said, "You can come to the next fair, if you want." Daniel looked at him, eyes soft. "I'd like that." Later, after Daniel left, Grace stood in the kitchen drying dishes while Eli sat on the couch, flipping through his project notebook. "He seems different," Eli said casually. Grace glanced over. "Different from what? From the guy I imagined. I thought he'd be, I don't know, too rich or too sorry. But he wasn't either." "What was he then?" Eli shrugged. "Just real." Grace smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think he is." In the quiet that followed, both mother and son knew something had shifted. Not a happy ending, but maybe finally a real beginning. The next morning was quiet in Hollow Creek, the kind of soft, overcast Sunday that made the world feel like it had exhaled overnight. The trees stood still, the roads were nearly empty, and in her small living room, Grace Whitmore held a shoebox in her lap. It had been years since she'd opened it, years since she dared. Inside were envelopes, some yellowed, some still crisp, all bearing the name Daniel Prescott, written in the same looping, hopeful script. Letters she had written in the early months, in the long nights after Eli was born, in moments when silence felt heavier than heartbreak. She heard the knock just after 9. Daniel stood at the door, less guarded than before, more grounded. He looked like someone who hadn't slept much, who had stayed up replaying everything he'd learned in the last few days. Grace opened the door. "I was just making coffee," she said. "Can I come in?" She nodded and stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table again, two people with 13 years of silence between them and now, the unbearable weight of unsaid things. "I want to show you something," Grace said softly. She placed the box on the table, opened it, and gently slid the stack of letters toward him. Daniel stared at them, confusion flickering across his face, then recognition, then regret. "You wrote these, I tried to reach you. After I found out, after I was sure, I mailed them to your house. I drove there, once, left one in your mailbox. They came back, some unopened, some, I don't know if they were even ever delivered." Daniel picked up the top letter. His name was written with such tenderness, it broke something inside him. "May I?" She nodded. He opened the first one slowly, as if it might crumble. His eyes moved across the page, then the second, then the third. She watched him read through the one she'd written the day Eli was born. The one that said, "He has your eyes, Daniel, and he cries like he's already seen too much of the world." Daniel covered his mouth with one hand, eyes glistening. "I would have come," he said, voice rough. "I swear to you, Grace, I would have come. I know," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." He looked up at her. "She kept all of this from me. My mother. She intercepted them." "I suspected," Grace said. "But I couldn't prove it. And after a while, life just kept going." Daniel reached for the letter written on Eli's second birthday, the one where Grace wrote about a paper crown made from cereal boxes, and how Eli tried to give it to the photo of Daniel she kept in a drawer. He pressed the letter to his chest and closed his eyes. "I missed so much. You still have time," Grace said. "But you need to go slow. He's careful with his heart. He's had to be." Daniel nodded. "I don't want to barge in. I want to be invited." Grace looked at him for a long time, then stood and walked over to the counter. She pulled a photo from under a magnet, a recent one, Eli holding a model of his turbine, mid-laugh, sun in his hair. She handed it to Daniel, then "Start here." He took it like it was something holy. Later, after Daniel left, Grace folded the letters back into the box, one by one. Not as wounds, but as artifacts. She didn't need to carry them anymore. She had given them to the one person who should have read them all along, and across town. Daniel sat in his car, staring at his son's photograph, the boy who looked like him, the boy he was finally ready to fight for. The afternoon sunlight spilled through the garage windows in stripes, casting long shadows across half-built circuits, wires, and tools. It was Eli's favorite kind of light, quiet, forgiving, golden, the kind of light where ideas flowed and time lost its sharpness. But today, he wasn't alone. Daniel stood just inside the doorway, his hands in the pockets of his jeans, watching his son solder copper wire into a control board with practiced focus. He didn't speak right away. He didn't want to interrupt what he sensed was a sacred rhythm. Eli finally looked up. "You're early," he said. "I didn't want to be late." There was a brief silence, not tense, just careful. Eli gestured to a folding chair. "You can sit, if you want." Daniel took the offer with quiet gratitude, lowering himself into the creaky metal frame and looking around the room. It was exactly how Grace had described it, part science lab, part spaceship, part teenage sanctuary. "What are you building?" Daniel asked. "Solar-powered irrigation timer. I'm trying to code it to adapt based on local humidity levels. Might use it for community gardens." "That's impressive," Daniel said. "Genuinely, I wasn't doing anything like this at your age. You weren't building stuff I was writing code," Daniel said. "Simple games, simulations, but I didn't know anything about the real world. I think you're way ahead of where I was." Eli didn't answer right away. He connected 2 wires, tested the circuit, and finally said, "Did you mean what you said the other night?" Daniel looked at him, surprised. "About what? About wanting to be around? About not leaving?" "I meant every word." Eli nodded, eyes still on his project. "I've had people say stuff like that before," he said quietly. "Teachers, neighbors, my mom's friends. Most didn't stick." "I'm not most," Daniel said. Eli looked at him now. Really looked. "Yeah, I know." A pause. "I don't know what to call you," Eli admitted. "I mean, you're not just Daniel." "But Dad feels weird." Daniel smiled gently. "That's okay. Call me whatever feels right. I'm not here to rush that." Eli nodded, relieved. "Okay." They sat in silence again, but this time it was warmer, like a room being slowly filled with light. After a while, Eli asked, "Do you want to help Daniel?" Blinked, "Me." "Yeah," Eli said, sliding over a second soldering tool. "I'll show you how." "It's not hard." Daniel moved beside him, awkward at first, but attentive. Eli guided him through connecting a resistor, steadying his hand when he trembled. Grace peeked through the kitchen window at the 2 of them, father and son, heads bent over the same board, and something inside her finally began to loosen. Not all stories get clean endings, but sometimes they get beginnings wrapped in second chances. That evening, Daniel lingered at the doorway as he prepared to leave. Grace walked him out, pulling her sweater tighter against the cool breeze. "He invited me to come back," Daniel said, smiling like someone who'd been handed something fragile and rare. "That's a big deal," Grace replied. "He doesn't open doors easily." "I know. I want to be careful with that." She nodded. "Then just keep showing up." Daniel looked at her, eyes full of something quieter. "Now, not apology, not romance, just truth. I'm not looking for a way to fix the past," he said. "I just want to earn my place in the present." Grace didn't reply immediately, but when she did, it was with a simple, steady voice. "Then we'll take it one day at a time." The morning mist hadn't yet lifted when Grace Whitmore heard the knock at her front door. It wasn't a hesitant knock. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was composed, measured, like someone who believed they still held authority in places they'd long abandoned. Grace dried her hands on a dish towel and approached the door, her heart already knowing who it was before her eyes confirmed it. Standing on her porch was Eleanor Prescott, dressed in a tailored gray coat and leather gloves. She looked like she had stepped out of a different world. Her expression was calm, but her eyes flicked quickly around the modest porch, the peeling paint, the wind chimes Grace had hung years ago with Eli. It was clear she hadn't come here often, maybe ever. Grace opened the door just enough. "Mrs. Prescott." Eleanor offered a small, polite nod. "Miss Whitmore, I go by Grace, and I believe you know who I am." Grace raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I'd like to speak with you." "Just for a moment," Eleanor continued. Grace hesitated, then stepped onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind her. "I don't think we have anything left to say." "I believe we do," Eleanor said, her voice cool but not cold. "My son visited me yesterday. He told me everything." Grace crossed her arms. "Everything you already knew." Eleanor's eyes flickered just briefly with something close to guilt. "I came because I wanted to look you in the eye and acknowledge what I did." Grace blinked. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was more than she expected. "You didn't just silence me," Grace said, her voice calm. "You silenced Daniel. You silenced Eli's right to be known. I was afraid, Eleanor admitted. Afraid that if Daniel was pulled off course, he'd lose everything he'd worked for, everything our family name was built to protect. And did he, Grace asked, lose it all? No, Eleanor said softly. But I lost something. Grace tilted her head. I lost the chance to know my grandson, Eleanor said, and maybe the chance to know the kind of man my son could have become sooner, if I had trusted him. Grace didn't soften. What do you want now? To meet him? The words hung in the air between them like a fragile thread. Grace didn't answer right away. She turned to look through the window, where Eli was sitting at the kitchen table, eating cereal, oblivious to the generational weight unfolding just feet away. You can't just walk into his life because you feel ready, Grace said, still facing the glass. He's not a boardroom you can negotiate with. He's a child who's learned to guard his heart. I understand that. Grace turned back to her. No, I don't think you do. A pause. I'll speak with him, Grace said finally, but I won't push him, and I won't let you make this about legacy or appearances. If you want to know him, it has to be real. Eleanor nodded. I wouldn't expect anything less. She stepped back, preparing to leave, but paused one last time. For what it's worth, Grace, you've raised a remarkable young man. Grace held her gaze, unflinching. I know. Eleanor left in silence, her heels clicking softly down the porch steps. Grace stayed there for a moment longer, hand resting on the doorknob, heart heavy but not unsure. Some bridges take years to burn, others take even longer to rebuild. Later that evening, Grace sat across from Eli on the couch, the television flickering in the background, though neither of them was really watching. I had a visitor today, she said. Eli looked up. Who, your grandmother? Eli blinked. Dad's mom. She wants to meet you. He didn't answer right away, just stirred the melted ice in his glass of lemonade with a quiet finger. Finally, he said, Do I have to? No, Grace said gently. You don't. It's your choice. Eli looked thoughtful, not angry, not scared, just cautious. I'll think about it, he said. Grace reached out and squeezed his hand. That's all I want. Spring came slowly to Hollow Creek. The snow melted in quiet patches, the river began to hum again, and the trees, still bare, leaned into the light like they were learning to trust it all over again. In Grace Whitmore's backyard, the grass was still recovering, and Eli's latest project, a homemade weather balloon, swayed slightly from the clothesline. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Eleanor Prescott had come to the door, and nearly a week since Eli had made his decision. I'll meet her, he had said one night, unprompted, while spooning peanut butter straight from the jar, but only if you and Dad are there. Grace had agreed, and so had Daniel. And now, they waited. Eleanor arrived right on time. She stepped out of the sleek black car dressed in a navy blue coat, a soft scarf at her neck, and something rare in her hands, a small wrapped box, awkwardly held like someone unused to offering gifts. Daniel opened the door for her. She looked around as she stepped inside. Her eyes moved over the lived-in details, the faded rug, Eli's artwork on the fridge, a pair of rain boots by the door. This wasn't her world. But for once, she didn't look like she was trying to assess it. She looked like she was trying to understand it. Eli stood beside Grace, his posture careful but open. Eleanor met his gaze with a quiet breath. You look just like your father, she said. Eli gave a small, polite nod. That's what people say. There was silence. Then Eleanor held out the box. It's not much, just a few things. Some photos of Daniel when he was your age, and a notebook your grandfather kept. He was an engineer. I thought maybe you'd like to see what kind of mines you come from. Eli took it, unsure, then looked at Grace. She nodded. Thanks, he said. Eleanor stepped back slightly, giving him space. I don't expect you to trust me, Eli. I know I don't deserve that yet, but I'd like to try. If you'll let me. Eli didn't speak right away. Then, to everyone's surprise, he asked. Did you know about the letters, Eleanor's eyes, filled with something deeper than tears? Shame, perhaps, or the weight of truth, finally given a name. I did, she said, and I regret it every day. Eli looked down at the box. He didn't forgive her, not fully, not yet. But he didn't shut the door either. I'll read them, he said. The photos and stuff. Eleanor gave a faint nod. Thank you. Later, after she left. Grace, Daniel, and Eli sat together in the backyard under the soft gray sky. Daniel leaned back in the old porch chair, arms resting on the sides. I never thought I'd find my way back here. Grace smiled faintly. You didn't. You were invited. Daniel turned to Eli. Thank you for that. Eli shrugged, still deciding how much rope to give you. Daniel chuckled. Fair. The wind stirred a few leaves along the ground. Grace closed her eyes and let it wash over her. You know, she said softly, there were so many years when I thought this story was over, that it had ended before it had even really begun. Daniel looked at her, then at Eli, and now she opened her eyes. Now, I think it's just changing shape. Eli reached for a nearby stick and began sketching something into the dirt, a simple diagram of a sun and a turbine and a water droplet. A new cycle, he said. Daniel smiled. Exactly. That night. Eli placed the small box from Eleanor on his nightstand. He opened it and pulled out the old black and white photo of a boy tall, dark-haired, with a mischievous smile and grease on his hands. He didn't look at it like a stranger. He looked at it like a mirror. Then he reached for his sketch pad and started drawing. Not a blueprint, but a family. Some stories don't end with a grand reunion. They end with small, quiet moments. A shared glance over dinner. A hand reaching out after years of silence. A boy finally calling someone Dad, Grace, Daniel. And Eli didn't get a perfect ending. But they found something far more powerful. A chance to begin again with truth, with healing, and with choice. This story reminds us that love is not always loud, but it's always resilient. And sometimes, what hurts us the most is not what was lost, but what was taken by silence, by fear, or by the cruel hand of prejudice. Because discrimination, whether based on status, background, or class, does more than divide people. It steals futures. It breaks families before they've even begun. But here's the hope. Every one of us has the power to choose differently, to see beyond appearances, to protect not our pride, but what really matters each other. If this story touched you, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Shining Stories for more tales that speak to the heart. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay tender, stay strong, and keep choosing love.